And you're with me, Shweta Kothari on News 9. Climate activist, educationist Sonam Wangchuk has been released from Jodhpur Central Jail after the union government revoked his preventive detention under the National Security Act 1980 with immediate effect. Wangchuk had been detained since September 26 last year following protests in Leh, where demonstrators demanded statehood for Ladakh and constitutional safeguard under the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India. Authorities invoked the NSA, citing concerns over public order in a sensitive border region. The government had earlier defended the detention before the Supreme Court of India, claiming that Wangchuk played a key role in mobilizing protesters that later turned violent. But the case also raised an unusual legal question around technology and evidence. During the hearing, Supreme Court flagged discrepancies in translation of Wangchuk's speeches that were cited as grounds for detention. Wangchuk's lawyer, senior advocate Kapil Sibal, argued that the activist had actually condemned the violence and that the translation placed on record misrepresented what he had said. So Kapil Sibal argued that Sonam Wangchuk actually condemned the violence and not supported the violence. Responding to the court, the centre said that the translation had been done by a government department and suggested that in the era of artificial intelligence, such translations are considered highly accurate. The bench, however, remarked that the least is expected was a correct and faithful translation of the speech actually delivered by Sonam Wangchuk. Before the court could deliver its final verdict on the matter, the government has now revoked the detention order, leading to Wangchuk's release nearly 6 months in jail. After 6 months in jail, the release of Sonam Wangchuk may have ended his detention, but it leaves behind a deeper question. If the government believes he was truly provoking people and responsible for unrest in Ladakh, then why revoke his detention before the court could examine the case? And if those allegations could not stand scrutiny, then why was a preventive law as sweeping as the National Security Act invoked in the first place? When a citizen can spend months in jail without a trial, only to be released before a final judicial verdict, it raises a fundamental issue, not just about one activist, but about the balance between national security powers and the constitutional right to democratic protest. Listen in to some of the reactions that have poured in before we go to our guests.
सोनम वांगचुक रिलीज, सवाल ये कि वो जेल ही क्यों भेजे गए? उन्हें जेल नहीं भेजना चाहिए था। उनके आंदोलन को भारतीय जनता पार्टी को भी समर्थन करना चाहिए था। भारतीय जनता पार्टी ने ही आश्वासन दिया था कि उन्हें स्टेटहुड का पूरा दर्जा मिलेगा, स्टेटहुड के पूरी पावर्स मिलेंगी, लेकिन भारतीय जनता पार्टी ने उनके साथ धोखा किया और धोखा करके न केवल धोखा जनता को दिया, बल्कि उनके साथ भी जो व्यवहार किया जिसमें जेल में जाना पड़ा, ये भारतीय जनता पार्टी की जिम्मेदारी बनती थी।
सोनम वांगचुक बहुत प्रतिष्ठित व्यक्ति है। देश को प्रतिष्ठा दिलाने के अनेक काम उन्होंने किए और वहाँ के जो आंदोलन है प्रकृति को बचाने के लिए, इन्वायरमेंट को बचाने के लिए जो आंदोलन किया, उसे दबाने के लिए षड्यंत्र पूर्वक उसके प्रतिष्ठा को दागदार बनाने के लिए उनको NSA में गिरफ्तार कर लिया गया। अब चूंकि 2 दिन बाद उसको जवाब देना सरकार को, उसके पास कोई जवाब तो है ही नहीं, तो कोर्ट से छूटना था तो 2 दिन पहले वो मजबूरी में छोड़ रहे हैं। उनके खिलाफ कोई सबूत नहीं है, लेकिन 170 दिन जेल में रखे ऐसे प्रतिष्ठित व्यक्ति जो देश नहीं दुनिया उसको जानती है, ऐसे व्यक्ति को आपने गिरफ्तार किया, ये पाप किया है भारतीय जनता पार्टी सरकार ने।
All right, joining me on the show is Suhas Chakma, Director, Rights and Risk Analysis Group. Also with us is Professor Prasenjit Biswas, Professor of Philosophy, Northeastern Hill University, Savio Rodriguez, Founder, Editor-in-Chief, Goa Chronicles. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking time out. Suhas Chakma, I want to come to you first, sir. The government had earlier accused Sonam Wangchuk of provoking the people of Ladakh, of attempting a Nepal-style, uprising in the state of Ladakh, and those allegations were made. He was in jail for 6 months, and suddenly the government says he has served half his tenure and he can now be let go. People are going to read it as misuse of the act and the law.
Absolutely. There was no case to be invoked against him. I mean, if he has actually, as alleged, committed any kind of offense, he could be tried under the laws of the land. You could invoke the charges under the Indian Penal Code, BNS, etc. I mean, why do you have to arrest somebody under the National Security Act? At the end of the day, the issue which he has been raising is an issue which was supposed to be addressed by the government of India. That's the actual status of the Ladakh, whether it will be union territory, whether it will be sixth schedule with more powers, etc. Then if somebody protests, it cannot be termed as a threat to national security. And since when actually seeking a separate state within India has become an offense or some kind of a threat to national security. I mean, that way, the states like Jharkhand and even Chhattisgarh would have, or Uttarakhand would have never been created. Reorganization of the states in 1971 in the Northeast would not have taken place even if there were violence incident. I mean, it was a mob. It possibly went out of hands because it's not anybody's control. And for that, or for those kind of offenses, you usually can try anybody and everybody under the normal laws of the land, and there is no reason, to invoke the National Security Act. So, I mean, it's unfortunate. And the problem in this country is when somebody is detained for months and there is no compensation for illegal detention, then where is the issue? I think it's a big issue. I mean, one of the key issue also is why the Supreme Court take such a long time, because if there was no case to be made out because against him under the NSA, the court should have adjudicated earlier. And I think this is where the crisis is, that each and every case goes to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court is the only court which takes a fairer position. The lower courts, whether it's the high courts or the magisterial courts, are not in a position to take certain, legal positions on the issues. I think there is a crisis in this country that every case has to end up before the Supreme Court. And that also raises a question with respect to the Supreme Court, that, you have not adjudicated upon a person who should have or who never been arrested under the National Security Act. National Security Act should not be invoked against any person who is a political opponent and who believes in democracy, and he's not the leader of an armed group. That's period. And in this country, we have leaders of the armed group enjoying the facilities of the government of India, including the NSA and IM.
Us evoking National Security Act against a person who has been an educationist, who has been a social activist, who's been fighting for the cause of Ladakh for a very long time. He's a popular face. He's somebody who has brought laurels to this country, and suddenly he's the enemy of the state, all because he's asking for statehood, and he's asking people to mobilize. In none of his speeches that were put out, and none of his speeches that we have come across, has he, asked people to be violent? Did he, ask people to take to streets, to pelt stones at each other? And if a mob gets together and starts pelting stone, that's not his problem. In fact, he was heard on record condoling that violence.
Yes. Yeah. Can I take this question?
Yes, Professor Biswas.
Okay, sure. I fully agree with Suhash, my co-panelist. And the point is that are we moving towards a situation of being a police state under a certain kind of surveillance, and the surveillance data put in the AI, as in the case of Wangchuk, has actually distorted his entire speech and turned him into a propagator of violence? Can you imagine such a kind of a big lie constructed before the court? And court also didn't condone it. Court was questioning that process of using AI. Why our law enforcing agencies are becoming so inept that they are targeting individuals with impeccable credentials, such as Sonam Wangchuk. And Sonam Wangchuk is not just an individual. He represents the collective dream of the Ladakh region. He is like the Mahatma Gandhi of the Ladakh region, if I do not exaggerate and assess him properly. This is how history will evaluate him. Such a person has been sent to jail without any definite charges, charges that are concocted, charges that are misconstrued, charges that didn't have any evidence attached to it. What can be most unfortunate than this in a democracy like India? So therefore, conscientious people across the world had been very, very concerned about this kind of an illegitimate detention. And good that on some loophole and on some legal grounds that pointed out that the charges do not have any foundation and they are forced to release him. That's a kind of a victory of conscience, victory of ethics, victory of democracy in a certain way. And that's what is celebrated across Ladakh today. Very much, I can tell you this. Yeah.
All right. Suhas Chakma, I think one of the concerns was that, of course, this was preventive detention and it carried on for 6 months, but to the point that there was no Supreme Court ruling in the matter, that he was released before Supreme Court could rule on the matter. For 6 long months, Sonam Wangchuk's wife went from pillar to post, trying to get matter heard in the Supreme Court, barring that one hearing where the court pointed out that there are discrepancies in the speech and the translation submitted to the court is not accurate to what Sonam Wangchuk actually said on ground. Barring that, there was no trial. The case was delayed and delayed for 6 long months.
I think there is a massive failure in the country when the Supreme Court becomes the trial court. Because the arrest under the National Security Act are not matters or issues which should ideally be considered by the Supreme Court. And people are constrained to approach the Supreme Court because there is no faith in other constitutional courts like the High Courts. Because if you look at the jurisdictions, the competence of the courts, the High Courts and the Supreme Courts, they almost have same powers and functions. So when people are forced to approach the Supreme Court, it in a way reflects the malaise in the justice system where, I mean, the admission of this kind of petitions, because the court is bound to protect the liberties of the individuals, when the Supreme Court is forced to intervene in this manner, it basically shows that High Courts and the lower magistracy is not functioning properly. It's an admission of that fact, and that's more concerning. So I think in a case like Sonam Wangchuk, who is a celebrated activist, and on whom or on whose experience even a famous Bollywood film was made, then of course it's much easier for him to convince the judiciary, the public, even the officials at some stage. But if it is not like somebody like Sonam Wangchuk, then of course they would be rotting in jail because the justice system doesn't function. So I think in a way it's a fearful situation where people have to approach the Supreme Court. Just imagine the number of people in this country who can approach the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
And how much it costs.
Absolutely.
For him it's a different issue because Kapil Sibal took it up because it's a political case, so he got it up. But imagine, the people in this 140 crore plus population, how many can afford to come to the Supreme Court?
And, a lot of people would say this is a classic case of misuse of law. And misuse of law to government's own advantage, where a person who is known to protest is suddenly turned into the enemy of the state. And I think it raises alarm bells there. And I don't know if Savio is Savio with us? I don't know if Savio is with us, but let me take this. Not yet. All right. Let me take this question from Professor Biswas then. Professor Biswas, the episode also raises concern over, the space for dissent and protest in India.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a region like Ladakh, where people are struggling to protect their minimal rights and who need a little kind of a safeguard as it is available in the Constitution under Article 244 or under Article 239 related to the autonomy of the region, where people demanded their own rights over their own resources and also demanded a certain kind of a Swaraj or self-rule in the Gandhian way. And Sonam Wangchuk's discourse was entirely to restore a sense of rights among the people, or rather give them back the rights that are taken away from them. And in the process of making Ladakh into a UT, what was sacrificed is basic rights of people, simple things like making a road or access to certain resources like water and certain parts of the grazing ground, etc., which are everyday problems of people. on the basis of which he was seeking autonomy, sixth schedule constitutional protection. So you can understand that it was entirely a democratic right, a democratic right struggle, or a struggle for people's right. Given that, which didn't have any threat to national security, it was made to be a threat to national security. That too for a person like Sonam Wangchuk, who throughout preached non-violence, preached dialogue, preached understanding. The dialogue was never carried out. The understanding broke down. There was a trust deficit between him and the central government.
Okay.
Because of which all these framings were done to teach him a lesson. Most unfortunate thing, a kind of very, very negative, adverse political attitude, which should not be coming from a ruling group, but it has unfortunately come through like that. And it's perceived as a kind of a witch hunting. And as Suhas has rightly pointed out, in so many cases, this kind of witch hunting is going on. Innocent people, people who are dissenters, are suffering because of misapplication of laws throughout the country. And there is no justice at the root level, at the bottom level. Justice happened at the highest level, where only select few can access that kind of justice. That's another kind of a malaise that has plugged our system completely at this moment. Completely at this moment.
Absolutely.
How do we come out of it? Sonam leads us by an example, and release of Sonam also tells us, gives us a moral lesson about Indian courts, about application of law, about how the state bureaucracy operates. And all this needs a radical correction at this point of time, because it is reaching to the level of a kind of stench which is unbearable in a democratic country like India.
Absolutely. And I think it serves also as a lesson to a lot of people out there, to a lot of dissenters for that matter, to be careful to raise their voice if they don't want to rot in jail for a prolonged period of time. Gentlemen, that's all the time I have on the show. Thank you very much for taking time. Thank you for joining us. It's a crucial story. Sonam Wangchuk is finally out of jail, and we'll be tracking his movements very, very closely. Climate activist, educationist Sonam Wangchuk has finally been released from the Jodhpur Central Jail after the union government revoked his preventive detention under the National Security Act of 1980 with immediate effect. Wangchuk has been in jail in the case related to protest in Ladakh since 26th of September last year, following protest in Leh, where demonstrators were demanding statehood for Ladakh and constitutional safeguard under the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India. Authorities invoked the NSA, citing concerns over public order in a sensitive border region. The government had earlier defended his detention before the Supreme Court, claiming that Wangchuk played a key role in mobilizing protesters that later turned violent. But the case also turned illegal, as a matter of fact, when the court said that the translations of his speeches were not proper, they were done by AI and were not accurate. The bench remarked that at least the least it expected from a government was a correct and faithful translation. Before the court could deliver the final verdict, the government has now revoked the detention order, leading to Wangchuk's release after nearly 6 months, raising question there as far as the NSA is concerned.